You know what? Not an Aryan amongst them.
I wasn't going to say it. That's like...
I'm just sorry. You know what? I'm politically undecided. If white nationalism is winning, I'm joining you. But can we get a white boy to lead? our Nick Fuentes, gay Mexican. Candace Owens, black lady with a Bronze Age pervert, gay foreigner, a gay Jew.
Fat too.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's all these people. I'm like, give me an Ubermensch. I'll follow you. I just want to be a functionary in whatever regime is going to happen after liberalism.
God damn it.
But I'm like, give me one. Give me an Aryan.
One amongst them.
Name one Aryan. Name one Aryan.
Amongst them.
You can't, dude.
There's not.
There isn't a popular Aryan. I'm bullish on it. You know, I think we're gonna get one. I think we're gonna get once all these swarthy homosexuals get out of the way, we're gonna get a real straight white non-Jewish guy to lead our Nazi movement. But unfortunately, right now we do not have a single one. Anyways,
welcome to Doomscroll. I'm your host Joshua Citarella. My guest is podcaster Brace Belden, a labor organizer, an infamous shitposter, and the host of the show TrueAnon. How did you get politicized? Because when I was a young man, right, you were very active in music. I played in bands in high school. I had some radical ideas, but I definitely didn't sound like I do now.
Yeah.
Did you have these ideas when you started out, or how did you first get into politics?
Well, to be clear, no, unfortunately, none of these are my ideas. I just stole these ideas from like smarter people.
Sure. That's a good way to do it.
Famous
they've got good ideas.
People. Yeah, but no, definitely not. I was horrible when I was young. You were in a straight edge band, right?
I was in a screamo band. Yeah.
Screamo band.
I was a straight edge vegan for a little bit. Yeah.
You have straight edge.
I
vegan
still have the
face.
haircut, basically.
Yeah, I can see you.
Phenotypically a straight
in like
edge
a
vegan.
long sleeve XXX kind of thing.
Yeah.
Did you have the watch?
I never got into the eco-terrorism though. I missed out on that one.
God, you should get one of those fucking guys who converted to like one of the guys who became like a Salafist in Chicago,
yeah,
or like
the
Hare Krishnas. No, I was horrible when I was a kid. All I sought was negative attention from other people and as many drugs as possible.
Sure.
That was really my main thing. I think the reality is like I was in a milieu that there was a lot of political slogans in, you know, like the Bay Area and like punk music. It was like ostensibly political. You know, and there was anarchy signs and people had the little books and we did food not bombs or whatever.
Yeah.
But like really, I just want to have a good time, play rock and roll and like have sex with girls.
Right.
It was later after like I understood how the world worked a little bit. You know, it was like 18, 19 maybe. Like I started like reading books. I don't remember which book I read, but I got really into Lenin, reading that because it was I could understand it. I think a big problem is that like I have sort of a not inferiority complex really, because it doesn't really like dominate but like I feel like a fucking dumbass a lot because like it's hard for me to read philosophy sometimes because like I went to like moron school when I was a teenager because I have, you know, like not even because I was stupid, just because I was in trouble. And so like I had to go to like the public school like extension thing. Because of that, I've always been like, oh, I can never understand this stuff. And I would try to read like whatever philosophy book and be like completely lost because I just didn't have the foundation for which I could like understand these things.
Lenin worked for you somehow?
Lenin wasn't in for that because he writes in plain English and he writes like with examples. And I think the version of, I think I read What Is to Be Done First, that had like footnotes that explained, or maybe I just looked it up, but anyway, stuff I didn't understand, it was explained in footnotes. But before that, I had understood the history of all that stuff because I'd always been interested in history. And so I was able to like place what he was saying over events that actually happened. And that let me understand it.
So you're 18, 19, you're reading Lenin. You had kind of like political-ish friend groups before, punk, anarchy type of stuff. Both of us grew up, we're around the same age, before social media was like part of every middle school experience, right? Like we didn't have it at 12 and 13 years old.
No.
So we would get into it through music or subculture, and then you'd find a book recommendation, some political iconography, and think, this is badass. I want to be part of that,
this is cool.
something like that. But now kids who are online are getting into these things through like weird subcultures, memes, videos, podcasts, Discord servers, and whatever. And they're a lot younger than 18, 19. You know, some of them are like 14, 15 when they get into this stuff, even on the younger side. They're posting the same iconography. They're posting the same books. They may or may not be reading it in some cases, but people are indeed getting politicized. And then later in life, Some of them do join political organizations. They do become active in the real world. Do you have a sense of like how to interpret these people, whether they mean what they're saying when they post online?
Well, I think it's tough. I mean, I was kind of subject to the same, I guess, social forces, but in a different way. You know, when I was like 15, 16, 17 probably too, I sought like negative attention, but it was attention nonetheless, in kind of the punk scene. I became kind of a notorious figure. Not that really that notorious, but
In
like
the local
a
scene.
bit of a heel character.
Yeah.
Kind of nationally.
Really?
A little
wow.
bit,
Okay.
yeah. And then later, definitely. But I realized that the easiest way to do this is like the dumb guy thing, was like, I put swastika on dress. Like I'll wear a dress.
God.
I was like 14 and we
On a
played a
dress.
show. Yeah, exactly. 'Cause,
Okay.
yeah, I know.
All right.
I was LGBT.
You got a lot working there.
QIA plus there. But I figured it was just, for me, I didn't understand why I was doing it. I kind of understood what I was doing it, but I didn't understand what those things meant, right? Like,
Yeah.
I was wearing a dress because I had seen pictures of punk bands in like the 70s doing that. I had a swastika on there because I had seen like Sid Vicious with a swastika t-shirt.
yeah.
And so I was just reproducing these things and sort of aping the style of something without ever like, I mean, it's not like Sid Vicious, but he was a fucking idiot. But like, there was no like context for me to do it. I mean, I knew what the Nazis were kind of, but like, I didn't know what any of these things meant. I didn't know that like, I'd never thought about gender or anything before. So like, me wearing a dress was just like, it wasn't like, I'm gonna like, whatever, subvert expectations of gender.
You're just trying to piss
I was
off
just like,
as
I'm gonna
many
wear
people.
a dress because I saw another guy wear a dress that looks like it gets you attention. And so basically what I'm saying is like the teenage, this is for me, my teenage brain thought like this.
Yeah.
I think that is kind of translatable into like some of what you see online with younger guys, right? Like, which I understand, right? It's there's no coolness. And like in this like social scene that people might be online and their little Discord groups or whatever. And again, I don't have a lot of experience with any of this stuff, but I do know how teenagers work because I was a teenager a very long time ago. But you tend towards like, you want to be unique or you want to be the most extreme or you want to have like the most like whatever. You need there's like a social hierarchy that you have to kind of compete in. And the easiest way to compete in that is by coming up with like the most retarded like evil thing you can think of and then be believing in that.
Paleo-Islamo-minarchist
Exactly,
thing.
yeah. Like remember that Adam Waffen guy who was just also in ISIS?
Wow.
Well, he wasn't
Must
in
be
ISIS.
very
but
busy.
yeah,
Okay,
there was some fucking it's like an Adam Waffen guy in Florida who killed his roommates and then called the police and like I think he called the police, maybe fled.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember, but
yeah.
he said he had pledged allegiance to ISIS and he converted to Islam and stuff. And obviously that's a bit of an edge case, but I think those same sort of like
Those guys endorse each other now. They're like, yeah, we're on the same side. We are the traditionalists of society.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like people are just making shit up, man. Like all of this is just like people are fucking playing play pretend. And like I hate to say it, like there's people who agree with me that play pretend or whatever. I think that's just the way that it works online. I don't remember you talking about this in your book. You really can't discount the influence of like the descendant of like online role playing that kind of occurs in these things.
Big
like, and you see it too. People will like make their like profile like there's some fucking like Bella Kun or something, like, and like kind of like act like him and like ape these fucking like old communist words and call each other comrade. Whenever I see two people who don't know each other referring to each other as comrade online, I'm like, you are pretending to like be a dwarf and an elf. Like, you don't know this fucking cocksucker. Like, you don't know each other. You like, this is the equivalent of that. This is historical role play. You might as well be out there being like one of those people who's reenacting the fucking Battle of Waterloo.
It makes a lot of sense. When you make a guild in World of Warcraft, right? Your whole crew, your squad, you all have this like tabard. You have to make your political iconography. You have to choose your colors. You have to choose your name. You have to create ranks and hierarchies and organization and stuff like this. And obviously, like, there's a huge bleed in from just people who did online role-playing games, then getting obsessed with politics. We talked about this game, what is it?
Hearts of Iron.
Hearts of Iron, yeah.
Yes.
What is that mod that had
It's
the
like,
Nazbols that
fucking-
made it so incredibly
I got
popular?
really into reading about it.
Like if you look at the Google Trends for Nazbol and this
crazy.
particular mod for
No.
Hearts of Iron, they take off at the same time. Like that game is single-handedly responsible for planting the meme.
And like also resurrecting certain historical political personality. Like I think a lot of the Huey Long stuff. Remember there's that big
Really?
revival on the internet of people pretending to like
a
Huey
few
Long?
years ago.
I think that also directly stems from that because I think he's a character in that.
Oh, God.
It's astounding. Like people really like, they take these influences from like media sources, so they're sort of just reproducing a reproduction, and it's photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and like I don't know. I've always wanted to it's classic. Everyone wants this. Like you see some freak online, you're like, I want to know everything about I want to know your complete every second of the day what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I'm so fascinated by you. And that's the same to me. Like all these people who are like pretending to be Huey Long or like call themselves like national syndicalists or something like this. Right, yes. Like there's like 20.
I interviewed one of those guys.
You did?
Yeah.
How?
It's not working out great for him.
It's not.
Actually.
It's not going well.
Yeah. He's now a Japanese imperialist.
See, that's what I'm saying, right? like it's just a fucking freak show. And like that actually like that is the one thing I always come back to. I'm like, God, like it's people debase themselves, turn themselves into freaks. And of course, like there is like the anonymity of online. Like nobody knows that I'm the one who's pretending to be fucking Pol Pot on my Twitter account. But like right. There's a certain part of your soul must just be eaten away by this.
Mm-hmm. I've spent the last almost like 6 years at this point interviewing people who got politicized online.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of them have these absurd titles like they're a crypto monarchist or some other queer anarcho-transhumanist, whatever type of label.
Yeah.
That's why I invited you on the podcast. And some of those people, they go to college, they start out really young. They go to college, they make friends, and then they depoliticize. They just don't care about this anymore. It was kind of like their hobby subculture where they were into punk when they were in high school, and then they get into indie when they're in college and their interest shifts.
Yeah.
And I think in many cases that's great, and they just log off and it's like, okay, leave that stuff behind you. Don't pretend to be a monarchist anymore. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Some people, on the other hand, do get really into politics and they go into political parties, they go into an organization. Is there any predictor, anything that is like a measurement of, let's say, paper membership, attendance to a protest, action in the real world? Like, how do we mark when someone's politics are no longer ironic and they start doing stuff that we have to think of as real, even if it sounds silly? I
think it's directly that, right? It's like when that translates into them like being in a physical space. And I guess maybe even just once, right? It doesn't, not necessarily there's not a lot of groups outside of some like left-wing groups that have consistent like meetings or whatever, things that are not public.
We got a lot of meetings.
A lot of meetings. I have meetings this week I gotta go to. It's you see this like very obviously on the right, and then I think a little less obviously on the left, but it still exists probably to the same exact extent. Do you remember there was a guy who would like walk around in, I think it was like Boston, wearing a Pepe the Frog suit? I believe he's since
what year?
Perished. Like 2017, 2018. But like you see guys like that where it's like, oh, you just like existed on 4chan and then like came out and did this, right? A lot of the times, thankfully or not, like a lot of these people are like maybe poorly socialized.
You don't say.
Yeah. I'll say it over and over and over again. A lot of these people are very poorly socialized and pretty obviously kind of weird.
Yeah.
And so people tend to avoid them.
As a poorly socialized weirdo who grew up on message boards, I empathize with that portion of it.
You think you're poorly socialized?
Yes.
No, you're trying to be like relatable to the freaks. You're not. I'm sorry, you're not. No,
I'm just eating meat for fun, I guess, then.
You just eat meat?
No, I'm not doing that right now.
But you've done that?
I did that for 30 days, yeah.
How'd it go? You must have
I lost a lot of weight. I was a little stinky.
Yeah.
It makes you really trim. Because you're not having any carbs
What'd
or
you
anything
eat for
like
breakfast?
That. Eggs. Do eggs. Do a lot of beef jerky.
Okay, so first thing you name is not meat.
Eggs are meat.
Eggs are not meat.
Eggs aren't meat?
No. Eggs are dairy.
They come from chickens.
They're in the dairy section. Dairy is a loose grouping
they need to be refrigerated.
That are related to barnyard pregnancy.
Okay.
People think dairy is just milk. Dairy is anything that's related to barnyard pregnancy.
Really?
That's, to me, yes.
Oh, okay.
So that's sort of my postmodern.
Oddly enough, if you're doing carnivore, you're not supposed to eat yogurt.
Why?
Because yogurt is, there's too much sugar. There's too much carbs in it.
Oh, you don't want
You'll
sugars.
actually go over on your like keto allotments. Yeah, I didn't know that before.
You're autistic?
Yes.
Okay, because I was gonna say like keto stuff. Anytime people like get really into I think my biggest problem is that I'm not autistic, so I can never really like I think to truly be disciplined in something, you need a degree of autism that I just don't have.
Yeah. Knowing every type of techno-libertarian on the internet.
Well,
Right.
actually, I guess I do know a lot of those.
You do kind of actually know a lot of them. Yeah. You might have a touch of the tism. You might be on the spectrum
But it could
somewhere.
be my ableism that actually causes me to learn about these people because I despise them.
There you
Back
go.
to like in real life though, like you pretend that you're poorly socialized. That's absolutely not true. A lot of these people are genuinely poorly socialized. I have experienced, like I've met less of them on the right just because I've been to less right-wing stuff, but like I've been to a good amount of right-wing stuff, like rallies and shit like that, not their meetings. And you meet people who are like, really, it's I hate to say it because it's so stereotypical, but like the classic like kind of guy in like a fucked up, the neck beard or whatever.
Right.
Listen, I'm no fucking, I'm trying to think of like a famous handsome guy, but I'm so
James
straight
Dean.
that I fucking can't. I'm no Gregory Peck.
Gregory Peck?
I just, he's in Roman Holiday.
What is he?
I watched Roman Holiday.
Okay. You saw something recently that made you think of him.
It didn't make me think of him. He's in it. Well, it made me look at him. He's a handsome guy. Regardless, a lot of these guys are fucking weird. And I think that like in general, at least I can say on the left, is like in political groups that I was in that like very like online people got into, it can actually make for some difficulties, right? Because they'll have these expectations that are set online of like, we're gonna do revolution now. We're gonna do the most extreme thing now. Like we have to denounce this, and like, they don't understand that like their actions in the real world have real world like effects that they have to like account for and have to follow through on, right?
They will quote memes in the meeting.
Yes,
literally.
Which is
I've seen people do that.
It is a humiliating spectacle.
It's very embarrassing.
And you know, I've always been, a lot of people just don't like me, and like people, it's weird. People will like. I think people maybe put me in like the online left because I have some like notoriety online or popularity, whatever you want to put it. But like, I'm certainly not in the sense that like any of these people are.
Not in that way.
Not in that way. No, like I have no participation in any kind of like online left-wing stuff. Even like when I used to have a Twitter account, that wasn't for like leftism purposes. That was like to tell jokes or whatever.
Sure.
And then I realized that made me feel bad to use that.
I think of you as one of the greatest posters
Now
of
retired.
all time.
Now retired.
Now retired, yes. But we have hung that jersey high on the rafters. Is there something about humor, particularly in the period that both you and I as young men got into politics, that like being on the left felt like edgy, it felt dangerous, it felt, you were going up against something, you were like defying the rules of conservative society, whether that was true or not. And now it feels like, especially when you look online, that there's not this same sense of like danger or risk or subversion that's happening on the left, and it feels very much like scoldcore. It feels it's like it's not fun anymore. Is there something that like that just kind of youth energetic culture has drifted towards the right in the last few years?
Well, I think it developed on the right and the left at basically the same time, right? Like you saw
around like 2011, 10, 11? Something?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest, completely checked out. I had a substance issue.
Yeah.
Until about 2014. And so like, I didn't have like the internet really. I guess I did, but like I didn't use it. I didn't know what was going on it in any real way. I'm talking more about like from like 2014, 2015, which is coincidentally right when I started paying attention to what was going on the internet.
That's when it got important, when I started paying attention.
That's like when I finally got like a new smartphone. In like 2014, 2015, like you saw like the rise, like the alt-right stuff. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was like the like Richard Spencer type of people or whatever, but a lot of that was like baked Alaska, like we're doing meme magic or whatever.
Right,
and like,
right.
This sort of like ironic, like jokey style or whatever. That developed much the same on the left or the broad online left or whatever. And it's funny because I think both of those things were rebelling against something that they viewed as conservatism. Yeah. Like I think that like a lot of people like in my generation, including myself at one point, sort of just always assumed like the dominant ideology was this like evangelical 1980s like Ronald Reagan conservatism.
I grew up thinking the same thing.
And but it's not.
It's not anymore.
It's just not. And it hasn't been for a while.
Was it back then? Or maybe that was
in the
more
1980s?
back then.
Absolutely it was. Yeah, I mean that was like the I mean that was just a product of the times, right? Like that was this sort of like
SLC Punk is what I thought. That was the movie I thought of growing up.
Yeah, same. And I watched that movie. Bro. Actually, of all the punk movies, I didn't really like that one because I don't like the way that guy looked as a punk.
Matthew Lillard?
Yeah, I was like, this is like street punk shit.
Yeah.
But also, at the end, he does just...
I
remember watching it with my dad, And I was like, my dad was being, he was not like a punk guy at all. It was just like, so wait, the movie you just watched, the guy sells out at the end? And I was like, that's, I think, the first.
Well, yeah, the moral is you either die or sell out.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah.
Exactly. Which is, I guess, like a good movie because that's reality for a lot lot of people. But I think it's funny for like a 14-year-old punk to be like, I want to be like this guy. But what the fuck was the question?
Is there something about vulgarity? Vulgarity and humor now.
I think a lot of that is the incentives of online shit, right? Yeah. Like it's all attention grabbing or like, I mean, to me, unfortunately, that is often just the way I communicated as a kid. Mm-hmm. But I think it's like, that's what gets attention online. But also it's a reflection of the extended adolescence. The millennial thing of like, you're basically fucking 22 until you're 40 for a lot of people.
Yes.
And I think that like that sort of like juvenile humor extends itself forward, regardless of political ideology, just because of that. There's this extensive, not cult of youth, because people don't, I think, worship youth as, I mean, they do, but not in this sense. I think it's more like people just act like fucking kids for a really long time.
Well, there's like career stuff that, it's, especially in New York, it's very easy to just be like in your college dorm room forever, basically. Yeah. And you live in a shitty apartment with a dozen roommates and whatever. There's also the cost of housing, the ability to have children. There's all of these like markers of maturity that my friends who chose not to go to the city, didn't pursue creative careers or whatever, like they had more traditional conservative lives, they just seem to act their age a little bit more.
Yes, no, absolutely.
And because it's easier and because you have real responsibilities. You have to like take care of the vinyl siding on your house. You have to like make sure your kid has breakfast before they go to school. And for a lot of like creative millennials in downwardly mobile creative positions, it's just very easy to be like, I think I'm just gonna hang out till 4 a.m. and do drugs all night. Like,
yeah, like I'll see guys I know that are like 40 and it's like, you're doing a fucking bump outside of whatever fucking shitty bar at like 4 in the fucking morning. Like, dude, we were doing that when we were 20.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, literally for 20 years.
For 20 years, you've been longer than that for a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I'm some great, paragon of maturity or anything like that. I'm subject to these same things as much as anybody else. But I think that is a really big factor. Is like a lot of the times, like urban living forces you essentially into this extended adolescence because you have fucking roommates,
Right.
And you have roommates for a really long time. And then there's also, I think, just like in general about people like settling down or getting married or anything like that, like, which I do think really does like getting married and having kids. Like, I think there's this weird rejectionist thing of this on the left.
They abolish the family types.
I mean, those are just nuts. Like, and like, it's crazy that people had to pretend that was a real fucking thing.
Oh,
like I read that
still
shit.
Had to, yeah.
Yeah, I know. You're a fucking crazy person.
Really? Yeah.
Like, and people rightfully find you weird.
Yes.
I think that like actually like having kids and like having a family or whatever, I think that does mature people in a way that like, I mean, not always. I definitely know a lot of people with kids that are fucking idiots.
Yeah, sure.
You have to focus on something besides yourself. I think that is like a really scary thing for a lot of people, including myself, And I think that reflects in politics too.
Yeah. I mean, I think this all the time, but like the people that have the spare time to do political organization that live in like major metropolitan hubs, a lot of them are basically the kind of description the person we just talked about.
Yeah.
Their political commitments may be more about their own kind of sense of moral superiority and well-being, like the way that previous generations would volunteer at a soup kitchen or something like that, and not necessarily going in to win. And there's just kind of a lot of like middle-class free time for a lot of these people, which is not like the stuff of the movement of the working class and so on. Who is moving the Overton window more? The people who are in these dysfunctional organizations or the people who are posting online?
100% the people who are posting online.
Yes, thank you. Okay, good.
It's obvious, like, how for like a while it felt corny to be like, I hate Trump or whatever, because like all the libs did it.
Yeah.
I think there's like a somewhat residual thing about Musk too. Like Musk is so obviously like such a fucked up character that like hating him almost feels like goofy, but I do really dislike Elon. I hate him. And I think that like the entire, what he represents, right? Of like this like stupid guy. I mean, he's not stupid obviously in some sense, but like politically and like socially, he's obviously like, subnormal.
Yeah.
This person like sort of like pushing these like right-wing things over and over and over and over and over again. That like gets like that makes it, pushes the Overton window way, way further than any like whatever person on the ground on the left or right. The thing is, like, whether that translates to the great mass of people. I mean, obviously, everyone knows like how online stuff works. Like, it's not like that just random people are getting the message and that's how you really spread it. Like, in terms of politics, like, it's the influential people that you have to get.
Well, that's Twitter, right? That's like, what is the 20% of people who are on Twitter? It's like every journalist. It's everyone who tells society's stories.
Yeah.
And so it's really influential for them. Personally, I don't know. I've been on Instagram. That's where I spend most of my time. So I don't really have a dog in the Twitter fight, but I can just observe that it has like measurably gotten worse in a lot of cases. And those people, I think, really feel like they're losing their social position. The people who like were really hanging on to Twitter, working at big newspapers, magazines, and so on. Those people are very much disempowered. Post Elon Musk takeover.
I think in general in society right now, like it's been very obvious for a few years, like there's a rightward drift, right? And you have all like the fucking like wackos who are like, you know, like the based Manhattan those people were that's the equivalent of like the gender fucking, you know, whatever motherfuckers out there. Like actual regular people are not rocking with you whatsoever. But in regular life, there are, I think just in general, like a rightward sort of shift. I think people are sick of the woke stuff. That's been a long time coming.
We're having a normie conservative backlash.
Exactly. Yeah. We're having a normie conservative backlash. And I think on the left or whatever, I think like just liberalism as liberalism, like referring, you know, I'm not a left-wing guy, like I'm a liberal now. Like I think that's coming back too. Like I think people are sick of like pretending to believe a lot of the stuff they maybe had to pretend to believe or believed because it was like, you know, helped them in some social situation or whatever. Like the fact of the matter is like a lot of that stuff is no longer socially useful anymore. That's like, remember when every fucking journalist for some reason was like, I'm a socialist now. I'm a socialist now. I'm a socialist now. Which, by the way, made everyone hate socialism. That stuff's no longer like useful, right? It's useful maybe as like a cudgel for like to whatever, cancel somebody and get ahead in your career or whatever, like get some sort of social standing. But like it's not useful in politics anymore. And so that stuff's done. It's not done, obviously. Like it's an eternal struggle. Well, not eternal. It's the final struggle. But like as like a social force among the middle class, like socialism is it looks to me like it's toast. Not obviously every single person who believes in it, not believe in it. And I don't want to come across like I'm saying I'm the only one who believes in social. That's absolutely not true.
Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't cool in like 2014.
Yeah, I think we're just reverting to the mean. Is that what you?
We'll just go back to normal.
Yeah, we'll just go back to normal
where it's like weird to be a socialist.
It's weird to be a socialist. Like actually Kamala rules. Like or like, you know, it's lesser to evil. Like it's like. That's just the way it is, you know?
In regard to moving the Overton window, there's a few different ways we can measure this, right? I think there's a whole bunch of right-wing Twitter accounts that both you and I like to make fun of. Some of them make appearances on Tucker Carlson, for example, right?
Yeah.
And that's an audience of millions of people, whereas their private account or their personal account might be tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands, but that's a pretty big megaphone, right? Those audiences are comparable to CNN, MSNBC, and so on. They're larger. They're larger now. Yeah. And so in terms of like telling society stories and moving the Overton window, these Twitter accounts, well, not anonymous anymore. A lot of them have been face doxed in actually the summer. So we know who's behind it now, which is inevitable.
Yes. Not, you know what? Not an Aryan amongst them.
I wasn't going to say it. That's
I'm just sorry. You know what? I'm politically undecided. If white nationalism is winning, I'm joining you. But can we get a white boy to lead? our Nick Fuentes, gay Mexican. Candace Owens, black lady. Fucking the Bronze Age pervert, gay foreigner, a gay Jew.
Fat too.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's all these people. I'm like, give me an Ubermensch. I'll follow you. I just want to be a functionary in whatever regime is going to happen after liberalism.
God damn it.
But I'm like, give me one. Give me an Aryan.
One amongst them.
Name one Aryan. Name one Aryan. You can't, dude. There isn't a popular Aryan. I'm bullish on it. You know, I think we're gonna get one. I think we're gonna get once all these swarthy homosexuals get out of the way, we're gonna get a real straight white non-Jewish guy to lead our Nazi movement. But unfortunately, right now we do not have a single one. Anyways,
we don't.
So maybe Tucker. Tucker, no, he's not. Is he Aryan?
People talk about him running.
Yeah, but I guess I could see that happening. Like, I know there's always been that talk, but I'm like, will he? He seems to me the only person who could actually like inherit the mantle of like Trumpism.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, right.
Like when DeSantis tried to do it, zero juice.
Didn't work.
Didn't work.
No.
Vance is not going to be able to. Vance has he doesn't have the.
People don't seem to like him. This is a.
And take note, you little Manhattan Nazis. Take note. Regular people do not like. They think you are a freak.
Well, it's people. I think people are confused because Trump is both this like heterodox economic populism, but then he's also like spit in the eye of the elites.
Yes.
And people like to say, oh, they like him because of his economic stuff. And oh, it's just like a bonus that he's like mean to the blue libs who are in charge. But actually, it's like, I don't think they give a shit about his policies for anything.
I really
And the
don't.
idea that now J.D. Vance is going over so poorly with most of America, it's like, oh, economic redistribution. What is this? Socialism?
Well, it's the thing is like liberals are so awful that like, I think, people really do like Trump because he's mean to the people that you always want to be mean to, but you have no ability to do it, right? Journalists and politicians, whatever. Like he hates like Ricky Lake or something. Not Ricky Lake.
Rosie O'Donnell.
He hates Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah.
And so like if you've ever wanted to be like, suck my fucking dick, Rosie O'Donnell, but you can't say it because this is the TV, Trump can actually say it and she hears it, right?
Well, he said to Jeb Bush that the Iraq war was a mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I felt that. That was like, damn, I'd wanted to say that to Jeb Bush for a long time.
I know, but it's like, that one's easy, right? Everyone's saying it at that point. You know, that's the thing is like, Trump is really, he's got like a pretty unique thing to him. And I think that like, if Trump loses, I think that might be tough for the GOP because I don't think that they have like a rockin' dude to replace him in terms of like recreating that same magic. But I think Tucker, of everybody that exists, who's like a mainstream political figure, he is definitely the one.
What do you make of these, like, Tucker's one example, also Josh Hawley, J.D. Vance, these people that talk about things that sound a little redistributionist in some cases. Marco Rubio is doing this a bit too now. What do you make of these guys? You're in the organized labor movement. You've done this in the past, right?
Not so much anymore, but I was,
Do you think they have real support for unions?
I mean, well, yes and no,
on the right will say this. They'll say it.
Yes and no. You know, I think in a general sense, like, no. I mean, I think they might have support for like labor unions in America of a certain kind because those aren't really any kind of like threat to capitalism or anything like that. Like they might actually end up shoring up capitalism. In fact, that is what a lot of people view the utility of labor unions as like to help it against maybe the darker tides of socialism, to serve as a bulwark.
Sure.
But I think probably some of them, they realize that like things are kind of unsustainable at the pace they're at now, and like this will help the system or whatever system they envision have a couple more years of lifespan on it. The fact of the matter though is I think a lot of people in America view like conservatives as never being amenable to trade unions in any way. Like the history of like trade unions existing in capitalist democracies, as especially in like the 20th century, there's been a lot of like Christian trade unions or like whatever, like trade unions that are aligned with conservative parties in like various European countries. Like it's not a totally alien concept to conservatism like in general. Just in America, obviously, like that has not really been the case. I also think that like a lot of these guys like Hawley and Vance have this really big anti-China stance, and they view American labor as an ally in that fight. And the fact of the matter is they are probably right.
It might actually be right.
They are. Like they are that probably if things advance on that front further, I think American labor will fully come down on the side. Obviously not many individual members, but labor unions as such. And again, not every single labor union, but a lot of them will join America in the fight against China.
Yeah. Well, we're describing them as being anti-China, but the irony of this situation is they're actually envious of China.
Yes.
That China's doing something correct.
Yeah.
And they understand that they need to like bring back physically making stuff, making things that have weight to the United States, rather than having our entire economy organized through finance and line go up, basically. And those guys are envious of China. And they're just trying to import the proper model to like get the American economy back on track.
Yeah, like I hope they do it.
That would be a positive development.
That would be a positive, like even if like whatever a conservative politician did that, I don't care. Even if a liberal politician did
Whoever does it, it doesn't matter.
I fully support manufacturing or coming back to America in any kind of way.
Yeah.
And not out of any kind of economic nationalism. I don't care that it's going to help the American economy, no disrespect. I love the American economy. But the fact of the matter is that, like, for my political purposes, I prefer it if more people are working in manufacturing.
Well, you can organize a shop floor.
Yeah.
Hard to organize a yoga studio.
Yes, and I think that's, yes, and don't get me started on that. I think there's a lot on the left who maybe would just like to organize the yoga studios.
Yeah,
and
that's the
shop
extent
floor.
of the ambition.
Yes,
Yeah.
And maybe will twist themselves into knots, defining and redefining proletarian as they see fit to fit their middle class whims and desires. Not to say that I'm not middle class, and not to say that I don't have middle class whims and desires, but I'm just saying that that's just that's the way it goes.
The irony of the emergence of this like pro-union GOP, this movement that's come up in the last few years, is that my friends in the labor movement, they describe Biden's administration as being the most pro-labor movement within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
I think they're correct about that.
I think
actually.
they are too.
I think
yeah.
of the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. He's had a number of pieces of legislation that are pretty significant, that have invested in infrastructure, that have increased material well-being for working people in the U.S. So the idea that labor has receded from the Democratic Party and should now get in bed with Republicans seems to be directly contrary to what we've experienced in the last few years.
Yes.
Not to say, I'll caveat all of this appropriately, that Biden's actions have been sufficient, that we didn't need a lot more, like an order of magnitude more or whatever else, but it's a pretty significant development given the uninterrupted trend of neoliberalism for like 40 years.
Yeah.
Right? What do you think about these pieces of legislation from Biden, this support for labor, the emergence of support for labor among the Republican Party? Are we seeing a tide shift in the project of globalization and neoliberalism in general? State investment into infrastructure, state intervention into the economy. These things are pretty uncharacteristic of basically your and my entire lifetime, right? From like 1980 onward, we haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah.
How do you explain this? How do you understand this thing?
To your first point, I fully agree that like Biden's NLRB especially has been like really good for labor. I would say, in fact, that is like really his only accomplishment that I fully, besides leaving Afghanistan. Although there's a lot about that, especially the withholding of funds that obviously I do not agree with.
Sure.
I fully agree that like Biden actually has been pretty good for labor. In terms of like whether we are seeing an actual tide shift, again, too early to see. I think at some point, especially as conflict with China, which will be the defining conflict. It already is.
That is, yeah. 21st century is the US and China.
Absolutely, yes. I think once that actually like congeals itself into something that's not congeals itself, but like after that transforms, in maybe a decade or 2 decades, I think we will maybe see like more things of that nature, like much more state intervention.
Yeah.
Again, like you're saying, like Hawley and Vance, like wanting to be like China, but we're not like China. We don't have a similar political system to China. We have very different relationship with our capitalists than China does with theirs.
Yes.
Yes. And so I think the way that comes out, it's hard to say because we haven't really seen. I'm sure that we have at some point in history, but I'm not smart enough to think of one. We haven't seen how that plays out. And so I think we will see like probably at some point, like large scale state interventions in the economy that try to basically build up our arsenal of whatever, whether physical weapons or like, goods against China. And if there is like a decoupling at any point, which, I mean, there's already a lot of like American firms that move their businesses from China to Vietnam or to India or to other places in South or Southeast Asia. But I think when we actually decoupling becomes like a real explicit foreign policy goal, you'll see some of that manufacturing move back to the US and probably to help that along some kind of like state intervention in the economy. Yeah. And I think people will even pretend that's socialism. I don't know.
Well, they might call it that.
They might call it that, but there could be even like, listen, there could be a Bernie Sanders type figure who like who comes to power basically saying that, we're not like the authoritarian Chinese, but we have to build up our own version of, socialism in America that like,
and that could be good for socialism, actually.
Who knows?
It could actually.
It could. I also think the centrist China is to win,
When we're looking at the 21st century and we're looking at geopolitical competition, there's different lines of thought on the political left. That socialism, because of the enormous power of the world hegemons, it will need to start from the top and work its way down. there's another way of thinking about it that actually socialism is impossible in the United States or in China because they represent an international middle class. They're bought off by the capitalists in their country. They have this, artificially elevated floor of their quality of life. And socialism actually has to come from the developing world, not from the advanced world. Do you have a feeling which one of those analyses you prefer?
I think that it's exceedingly unlikely that the next communist revolution happens in the United States of America. I think for myriad reasons, these things tend to happen in the periphery. In fact, almost always happen in the periphery. I mean, I don't know, Russia in fucking 1917, whatever, but like pretty underdeveloped economy, especially compared to like the Western European or anyone else in that war. Well, not anyone, Ottomans. In China, same thing, right? I tend to think by this very basic maxim, which I always repeat, the countryside surrounds the city, right? And so like, what I hope will happen is that there are revolutions in the third world because there are much more fertile grounds for revolution in a lot of these countries that are, especially in like South Asia and in, I guess parts of the Middle East as well, is that there are like huge masses of people, somewhat oftentimes engaged in like productive labor. There are still large political organs, oftentimes ones that are still explicitly revolutionary. And there is a less able and adept government apparatus, right, or state apparatus. Police and the army might be corrupt or ill-equipped or, poor troop dispositions. Overthrowing, like, for instance, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, which I do not encourage. We're speaking in general terms, a lot easier than like overthrowing the President of the United States, right? Because there just isn't this locked in apparatus that will prevent that from happening, or if that person is taken out, can just easily replace them. And so I think that like just for obvious reasons and for what all of history has shown us, like these things are much easier in the third world. Now, what could possibly happen is that there are a series of revolutions in the third world that serve to form a large block that can isolate the United States.
Interesting.
Again, these are all just like, who fucking knows, right? Like something has to happen first. But do I believe that there will be a revolution in America first? No, absolutely. No, I don't. I wish there was, but like, I would be lying, or like, it's completely diluted. I want there to be. And if there is an actionable plan, I'll join it. And if I could think of one, I would. But it just doesn't seem extremely possible as things lie presently.
I'm inclined to agree with you.
Yeah.
I feel
I
like
think there's a temptation to say otherwise, right? And there is something to be said for revolutionary optimism, but there's also something to be said for like, a real accounting of what is going on.
Well, there may be a way to chip away at this from either side, where if you are able to achieve social democracy in the United States and reel back some of its imperial expansion, then that would create more favorable conditions for socialist revolutions in the developing world. And, these things can actually work in concert with each other in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, that's like one of the only things I support about Trump is him exiting the U.S. from any kind of international organization, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe taking back U.S. troops, which didn't really happen. Anything that damages America's ability to force project, whether economically or literally with troops, is I think useful, even if there isn't a revolution somewhere else. Like it doesn't matter. Like we just need to we need to bring our boys home, and then not just our boys in uniform. We need to bring our bureaucrats home. They're out there in Europe, so far from America, and they're making these deals, and they're like putting these sanctions on people. Bring them home. Their wives miss them. They're cheating so much out there. Make them stop cheating.
We're talking about socialist revolutions. There's different theories, different schools of thought on the left, broadly divided between socialism and anarchism. And both can be revolutionary. They have very different goals, very different things they want to accomplish, ways of organizing society. For a lot of young people who are new to this stuff, they may not really understand those differences. What are the differences between socialism and anarchism? What do they want to achieve? How are their revolutionary goals different?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by socialism. It also depends on what you mean by anarchism. But I think in broad strokes, socialism does not call, or revolutionary socialism does not call for the immediate abolition of all forms of governance, right? Not necessarily forms of governance, but like a state.
Sure.
Like there's still a state in socialism.
They want to take over the state. They don't
Yeah,
wanna
they
get
want.
rid of
Well, they want to take over the state, smash, and again, depending on the tendency of socialism or whatever.
Yeah.
But like generally, you want to smash the state and then build it up with proletarian organs that exercise control. You want to get rid of the bourgeois state and replace it with a dictatorship of the proletariat, but a state. Anarchists do not want a state. You know, there are different flavors of anarchy. People believe in all kinds of different things. But in general, it's much more it is decentralized.
Sure.
And there is no state. There's sort of governing bodies or whatever, some kind of like, you know, they have, what are those, Occupy Wall Street kind of like,
Oh yeah, there's
speaking circles or whatever,
yeah, relays
consensus based.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
There's
It
different.
takes them 11 hours to order pizza.
Exactly. And you know, there's also generally like different methods of sort of revolutionary action that each will take. Anarchists have often favored individual action, right? Like assassinations, the propaganda of the deed, you know, individual acts of terrorism. Communists, on the other hand, have engaged in those things. But in general, there was kind of a big backlash against a lot of that sort of like individualist mischief making back in the 1920s and the teens, because they realized that like there's a degree of discipline and organization you need. The way that I think of things is like, listen, think of like it's a class war or whatever. There are armies, and the army of the rich guys is really well organized. Like they have the actual real army. You know, there's something to be said for a guerrilla. And again, I'm speaking in like the very general sense of like methods of organization. In general, you need a huge degree of discipline and organization. And I think a lot of anarchists fetishize the opposite, right? Spontaneity. And it becomes this way. And listen, I got a lot of bad things to say about communists too. So any anarchists that are listening to this, don't worry.
Go ahead.
I'll get there. But I think that there is there's this tendency that I've seen in a lot of anarchists. I'm friends with anarchists. I know some. Well, not. I guess I am. I'm trying to think of one, but I'm sure statistically I'm friends with an anarchist. You know, I've always noticed this tendency for a lot of people who believe in that lifestyle to view politics as like almost like a way of like self-fulfillment, and like there's like a spiritual and social becoming that happens. Well, spiritual, social, I guess becoming does happen. That happens alongside revolution. Like whether we get the anarchy or not doesn't really matter. Like as long as like I'm having fun or whatever.
Yeah,
And again, like, this is not true of every anarchist. This is just like a general tendency that I've noticed. But there's a great fetishism of spontaneity. So like we just need to get everyone on the street and see what happens. But the thing is, we get on the street and see what happens. What if they do something that's stupid? You know, or what if they do something that actually hurts us?
Right.
Or what if they do something that is politically we're opposed to?
What if they're just from another group that has totally different views, and they hold up signs saying something we disagree with, and they do a whole bunch of shit that's not part of our project?
Yes. And then there's like also there's this sort of semi-fascist, well, it's more French, but fetishization of violence as well. Listen, I abhor violence. I've got my ass beat 1 billion times in my life, although not for a while. I'm not gonna lie. But when in my youth, and maybe not so youth, many times. And I think that there's a degree of character building that it gives you. But there is like you saw it with a lot of street fights that went down in 2020, right?
Yeah.
There was like these big Antifa groups that would just like kind of go out and have these brawls with these Proud Boys. Yeah. It's like, listen, I get, you don't want like, listen, the KKK is marching through your community. Yeah, go fight it, whatever. But like, I think that there became this like sort of this view of a lot of people that like Antifa or like whatever, like we're gonna go bash the fash. It is like in itself like getting us towards a political goal.
Right.
But it really what it is like you're just beating up some fucking freak. Which listen, I hate freaks, right?
Go for it.
Beat their asses. You know, not my problem. I'm not there. I've seen it. But is it getting us closer to any kind of organization? Like, no, it's not. It's not.
When you try and transpose this onto posting strategies,
Yeah.
right? We're talking a lot about social media, how people get into politics, how things that are said online then have downstream effects into political reality.
Yeah.
These divergent strategies are actually kind of important because if you're posting for political education and you're linking people to materials where they can enrich their understanding, they can get involved in organizations that are hierarchical, that have ranks, that are disciplined, versus this more kind of, let's say, anarcho-liberal approach where you're posting this kind of outrageous propaganda that's going to rile everybody everybody up, get them out on the street to do this disorganized protest that maybe doesn't have any particular demands and no one's in charge of it, and then that is somehow the agent for political change. I would say that social media is designed for the latter, right?
Absolutely.
It's not designed for the former.
No.
If you're trying to link somebody a Lenin PDF, that's going to do a lot worse than some kind of like outrageous clip of violence or people protesting on the street or something like that.
Absolutely. Sex sells or whatever. But like in general, yeah, because like social media favors like individual notoriety and like, image making. And so like is almost not designed, because it wasn't, but like it gels really well with like a spontaneity and like also like the cult of violence and like image and things like that. Like it lends itself really well to provocative or evocative displays of whatever, whether it's sex, violence, whatever.
Yeah.
And the fact is like that is a lot easier to showcase in a street fight or like a whatever, some car on fire, than it is to like actually, and maybe go get a job at like a factory somewhere and talking to your coworkers, because there's no social gain to be made from that.
Not very sexy to have like an Excel spreadsheet of like names and phone contact numbers.
It's not, but it also, the behavior that encourages in individuals, and this has been written about a fucking million places, is so antagonistic to being organized and being like a disciplined member of a group. I mean, we saw this a lot with like PSL, like a bunch of like very young people joined that during the Trump presidency.
Yeah.
A lot of those people had online followings and
I interviewed a young man who was part of the organization. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of them, frankly, couldn't shut the fuck up. You see a lot of these democratic centralist groups in the U.S. actually really struggle with their membership because all of these internal debates or whatever happen online.
Yeah.
And when they happen online, they involve people from outside of the party, and they give these, like, it's really, 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 really not conducive to like having social media and having like a democratic centralist party, or a party with like a high degree of discipline or organization. Yeah. In fact, I've seen it happen like numerous times, completely destroy these organizations.
I know people it's happened to.
Yeah.
There's leaks. Somebody decides to have this conversation instead of like in the private chat or in person, they decide to do it online.
Yeah.
People then get kicked out of the organization. There's all of these kind of cascading implications. People are also, in some cases, just like afraid to take a dissenting opinion because of what the online response might be.
Yes.
Even if they think it's right, they're like kind of held hostage by the attention dynamics on social media.
Yeah.
And so it's been really, really disastrous for not even just left-wing groups, for any kind of like, even just a magazine about like sports, something totally apolitical, to have any kind of hierarchical discipline structure where there's an editor at the top, or there's someone who makes decisions, who, represents other people below them. These positions can change in and out over time. They can be more or less egalitarian, but anything that is supposed to, put you in, you're part of an organization that works towards a common goal, those things have really been liquidated.
Yeah.
Like they basically have been sent to the chop shop and sold for parts.
You saw this play out a lot, I think, in like DSA stuff too, where like,
I was thinking about someone from DSA.
Yeah, there would be these like factional battles that would happen within DSA.
Yeah.
Someone would realize that like, oh, I can actually shore up support for my side and give the impression that like I'm correct, and maybe even like hurt the reputation of my opponent in this group if I just take this to online, where like everyone speaks in this histrionic, like victimized or victimizer tone. People act absolutely out of control because there is oftentimes like anonymity involved in it. And it's just like exactly what you're describing, the social dynamics of online just really, really, really damage a lot of these formations. And then, there's been a lot of talk like, well, how do we make formations that like are able to exist alongside online stuff? Frankly, like, I don't think you can. I don't think that like the party form, which has not been supplanted by anything, like there is no alternative. There's alternatives that people think of, but show me one success. Like the fact of the matter is, like these things, like social media is a fundamentally inhuman way to communicate with other people. It is without a doubt like one of the I'm not gonna say it's regression because it's not going back to anything. We never had anything like that. Yeah. But I would say it is an absolutely negative across the board development in human communication, and I think you're seeing its effect in really large scale societal ways, but then also just like in general, like on political parties and things like that.
I mean, there are some organizations that have this figured out. Like if you enlist in the US Army,
Yeah.
there are rules about what you can post on the internet,
Yeah.
right? Like if they've figured out how to do it, it would just stand to reason that if you're part of a socialist organization, maybe when you sign, you get your paper membership, you should say, you could make a promise to everyone like, I'm not gonna bring my grievances to social media.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring it to the proper channels here to resolve the conflicts because I know it hurts the organization when I just go online.
But the thing is, I think a lot of people, I think that there are those agreements in some organizations, but people break them because there is this like, this view that like, why should
Well, then
anyone
you
be
kick
able to...
them out.
I know.
Like they
but
get
and
kicked out of the army.
Then they get like an OCD fascination or like a fixation on your fucking group and like an obsession or whatever. But like, yeah. I mean, there's, yes, but like with the U.S. Army, the problem is, or the difference is like that's attached to your livelihood and like there could be legal consequences for things.
Right.
In a party, what are you gonna do? You can't go to our little fucking office anymore?
You don't,
You know what
you
I
don't
mean?
get to go to
oh,
the
you get
drinks
to just
happy
be popular
hour.
only online?
Yeah.
Now you don't even have to do any of the political stuff? And you have an excuse not to do it now because you got kicked out because you're a fucking loudmouth, antisocial freak.
Oh, you were too radical.
Yes. Or
You had a
too
radical
you were
vision
too
that other
radical.
people couldn't
Exactly.
share.
They couldn't
Yeah.
handle it. They're transmisogynoir, blah, blah, blah,
what?
colonial, transmisogynoir. I got called that once and it stayed with me. I got called that
okay.
one. I'd never heard it before. And I went, what?
What does it mean?
It means you're transphobic against black chicks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
But I had to like go like,
You
it's like how they have music
have to, like,
videos with
count
the
things to
thing
know.
going across
Yeah,
it.
yeah, okay.
It was like karaoke.
no, that
for
does
me.
actually make sense. I just hadn't heard it
And so I
before.
reacted to being called that much later than, and you know how I got called this? Very similar dynamic to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
It was an in-person closed meeting, no phones, but a lot of people there.
Yeah.
And there was a conflict that I had with another person, and I was, I'd been selected to speak on part on this, and I noticed that there was a person filming me surreptitiously with the obvious
with their phone in the
like
corner?
this, and like with the obvious thing like you're gonna post this online.
That's not allowed in the first place.
No,
There's
it's not allowed in the first place,
phones
but
in
we
the
had
meeting.
voted for like explicitly this is a closed meeting. You like no phones out. Because it was a disciplinary process, not against me, against somebody else. And I was like, you're filming, like stop filming me. And you're doing it sneaky because I know you're trying to
they're
fuck with
hiding
me.
it, yeah.
And that request was denied, and I asked again, and then I got called transmisogynoir by the person filming. And it was just a crazy person. But like, it was I was like, what are you, like, this is like, you're taking this political organization's internal problem and you want to bring it out there. And I think a lot of people do that. It's just in general, not necessarily about disciplinary procedures or anything like that, but about like their political opposition within whatever group that they're in. They take it outside because like, well, the world needs to know, right? Or like, but really it's like, this will help my online identity and my like, whatever, like this will help my brand. And we all have our little individual brands. I think in communism or whatever, like on extreme online stuff, I think it's much easier to create those brands than it maybe is in just like sports or whatever, because there's a million fucking Packers fans, but like you get to be a special little Bella Coon.
Well, I mean, I think the sad state of the political left at the moment is that it feels rather hopeless. I mean, the analysis is right. I've never doubted that. You know, my adult life, I've always believed in these things. It's like, this makes sense to me. I think it's right. Putting it into practice, very difficult process, lifelong process. Who knows if it ever happens? But when the conditions for organization are not good, people often start to turn inwards and they start to fight amongst themselves. They start to do purity tests and all sorts of other things. And so I find that to be kind of symptomatic of basically how powerless these people feel.
Yeah.
How difficult it is to implement their ideas. And so, I mean, one thing that you can do, right, is you can purity test somebody else. You can kick them out of the organization. You can say whatever, X, Y, and Z. And, you're not going to overthrow capitalism tomorrow, but you can kick somebody out of the meeting.
Yeah.
That's very accomplishable.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think, I mean, so much of like, I think politics is people expressing their hopelessness and like lack of power in these small ways that like they can forget that they are that or feel like that.
Do you think though that like when Musk has now taken over Twitter, these guys were empowered by being like this dissident minority group that was like against the rules. And now that they're the ones who are in charge and they can say whatever they want, it has kind of turned into like right-wing infighting where they're now like tearing each other
gay,
apart.
You're Jewish, you're black.
A lot of that.
This is the problem with must buy in Twitter in the first place, is like the only reason that you can actually like, or the way that you can actually gain a following or whatever, like your little dissident group gets like some kind of notoriety on the online space, which might, trickle out to real life, is by being in opposition to another force. And so like, that's why Twitter worked well earlier for a lot of these guys, because they got to be like, go head to head with the libs or whatever. And now it's just like so weird and diffuse and like generally right wing that like, you basically have to fight among yourselves.
Yeah, they have like purity fights.
They
have to purity test their people. Yeah, because I guess, this is true for kind of any minority coalition. Like I think of paleoconservatism as a movement, right? You had Murray Rothbard and you had Pat Buchanan.
Yeah.
And the kind of free market, open borders philosophy of Murray Rothbard, very different than the kind of heterodox economic populism of Pat Buchanan.
Yeah.
Strong borders, not allowing immigration. But those people found themselves in the same movement.
Yeah.
Right? They were the same group, conflicting ideas, deep antagonisms. But because each of those groups was actually so small, they couldn't afford to break off on their own.
Yeah.
Because they were so disempowered, they had to be this coalition despite all of their differences. And now that the right is in charge of Twitter, they're just like tearing each other apart.
Yeah. But
it feels good from the left to see
well, because you saw this
stuff.
Stuff mirrored when like socialism, as people called it, got popular like 7 or 8 years ago. You ended up having this coalition, like people who were like self-described democratic socialists, which in generally has meant like usually like maybe left-wing European social democracy, but like usually just like it's sort of like mainline mixed economy, democratic, anti-communist, like vaguely center-left thing.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you had like anarchists who were like, open the prisons, open the borders, whatever. And you had this like sort of like coalition of these people. The difference is like none of these people could actually get ahead and like get any sort of like there's no like version of one of those people that bought Twitter or whatever, or is the vice presidential pick.
Right.
Like the closest was like the Bernie campaign, and you saw a lot of the contradictions play out there.
Sure.
And so now you're seeing that same thing kind of repeat itself with these right-wing freaks.
The stuff that Bernie was, I don't want to say selling, the proposals from Bernie.
Yeah.
Right. When socialism started to trend, let's say like 8 years ago now, you started to hear things like fascism and socialism, words that haven't been said in American political discourse for a long while.
Sure.
But my sense of it is that the fascism people were describing was not really capital F fascism of the 20th century, and the socialism was not capital S socialism. It was more like social democracy.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, this actually exists in Denmark. We should try it here. And a lot of people were amenable to that. And it wasn't really the kind of 20th century romantic revolutionary struggle that we associate with capital S socialism.
No, not at all. I think that caused a great deal of confusion, and it's this sort of like reproduction of like what like people seeing like memes or like like an article they like, and kind of like reproducing some of the narrative of that without any of the actual like meat behind it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And which I don't blame people for. Like not everyone has to be like crazy politically involved or anything like that. But I think there was a great confusion of definitions, and that obviously still persists to this day. And I'm not somebody out here like, who goes like, you're not a real socialist. I don't fucking care, But I think like just objectively stepping back, that led to a great deal of confusion. And all these contradictions that would have happened regardless just became really almost impossible to resolve in some cases.
One of the things that is peculiar about that word, socialism, people would say it about Bernie Sanders. They'll also say it about Joe Biden, they'll say it about Kamala Harris, they'll say it about J.D. Vance, right? They'll say it about anyone who talks about economic redistribution.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like, okay, this is a strategic decision for the left. They're going to call us socialist anyway. If we just talk about increasing the corporate tax rate, for example, they're going to call us socialists. If we want to be that, maybe we should just get out ahead of it and call ourselves socialists.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a strategic advantage, or is that a mistake?
Well, look at how history played out. Yes, in some cases, no in many others. Like at the end of the day, like socialism, even in its like whatever debased form of like Bernie Sanders sort of tax shit or whatever, is still like it's still verboten to a lot of Americans.
Right.
And that line of attack still works to some degree.
The word is verboten.
Yeah, exactly.
But the policies might be popular.
social democratic policies might be popular.
Right.
I think genuinely, and it gives me no joy to admit this, but like I think like genuinely like revolutionary socialist policies in America are deeply unpopular.
Yes.
I think a lot of people delude themselves into thinking they are popular, and like there's this great mass of people who we just need to be activated by us or whatever. It's the same people like the way that politicians think about like independent voters or like non-voters. Like they actually all agree with us. We just need to talk to them.
Yeah.
And the fact is that like most people don't agree with even basic socialist principles and policies, even like very much reformist, non-revolutionary, anti-revolutionary socialist policies. But it's very difficult to like actually have to convince people to support those policies, and so people just assume that they either believe it and that we're being prevented from talking to them, or whatever other excuse.
If you look at these Nordic countries, I don't think that you or I would call them socialism. We'd call them that they have economies that are more socialized than privatized.
Yeah.
We'd call it maybe actually existing social democracy or something like that. But my sense is that those programs are kind of appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Yeah, I would say so.
I think that people could get behind like a social democratic president or whatever, or policies. And we saw that with like Bernie Sanders, like he was massively popular.
With a lot of the undecided or independent voters.
Exactly,
sure.
Yeah. But it just didn't happen.
It didn't work.
It didn't work.
Yeah.
The big difference is like those Nordic countries, really every other Western European country, every other country basically, has like a pretty like strong history of, I think just due to the nature of parliamentary democracy, a social democratic party having some amount of power and being able to govern in some sense.
Maybe 50 years of uninterrupted power in the case of Sweden.
Exactly.
It's a lot of institutional power.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like, in France or Germany, any of these places.
Sure.
It's not a foreign thing to them. But for us, it's just by the many integers of history, it's just not the case here.
This is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I think there's two ways of thinking about this on the left, where some people will think that we need to create the conditions for revolution, which means if things get worse for workers, they are more likely to revolt. And there's an alternative way of thinking, which is that when the workers are empowered and they have good organization, they have good wages, then they can make more and more bold demands. And that's a pretty important divergence, right? Because that strategically, you start to make different decisions from that.
Yeah.
I know we're both fans of the Vincent Bevins book, If We Burn, the Age of Mass Protests and the Missing Revolution.
Insane the title, that you're doing after the colon shit there, the subtitle.
I mean, I've cared so much about, this has really been my field of study for like the past 10 years, is like looking at social media as a form of social organization. That is, there are rules of governance, there's identity in these systems, there's exchanges of currency. Like this is a new way of organizing human society. And there were utopian visions attached to that. You know, that people said, oh, this is going to be peer-to-peer, even better than communism, more egalitarian, whatever. It's a totally new way of organizing society. A lot of that stuff, it won't surprise you at all, did not pan out.
No.
In the Vincent Bevins book, it seems to me like he kind of resolves at the end of it that Brazilian social democracy under Lula is a very positive development.
Yeah.
He sounds quite revolutionary in other contexts internationally, but in the case of Brazil, he seems rather amenable to social democracy. Do you feel like those divergent choices, that workers becoming more precaritized makes them more likely to revolt, is that a better strategy, or workers becoming emboldened, having higher wages, better organization, that social democracy incrementally leads towards more demands, more equality in society?
Well, annoyingly, first I have to disagree with the framing in the first place. I can think either of those things, and like there can be these debates on the left on either of these things.
Right.
The reality is like you actually have to do one of those things for your thoughts to actually really matter, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, we're just calling balls and strikes, which, I like calling balls and strikes. There's probably great historical examples for either one. I think what makes America kind of peculiar is that like we have had no great revolutionary surges. The only ones that we like are close to it. I mean, there was the great strike waves like the 20s and 30s and stuff like that, but like usually those were fairly local things. I mean, even or statewide. And then like 1968, which was just like kind of a, well, it wasn't very revolutionary.
Not very much.
But it's the sort of the closest in living memory. You could kind of make the case for either. But the reality is whatever's going to happen is going to happen unless you intervene to make it go a certain direction. And I don't see a great intervention coming from any kind of organized party that would be able to shift the tide. And so like, Yeah, generally when people are deprived of very basic goods or basic political rights, they can gain a more revolutionary conscience, right? So like you see this in like the Philippines in like the during the EDSA revolution, is there'd been like an insurgency, communist insurgency going there since the 1960s. But after 10 years of martial law, or more than 10 years of martial law, but like all these martial law, all these political rights being taken away, the economy is in the shitter, people revolted. But what they revolted for was for a liberal democracy, right? For a slight regime change. Yeah. And so like, I think people tend to think like, okay, yes, if things get bad enough, people are gonna take up guns and then kill all the fucking business owners or whatever, and we're gonna have these Soviets. Yes, But the reality is, like anything like that happened, the Soviet Revolution, all the revolutions in Central Europe in the 1920, in the Chinese Revolution, these were preceded by decades of revolutionary struggle, real struggle, not like theoretical struggle. We talk about this, we talk about that, like assassinations, murders. It's the same thing, but like going to the countryside and being organized in these large groups, right? And the fact is like there's no group in America that even comes close to being an organ that could affect whether things get better for workers or whether things get worse for workers. Right. I tend to think that like anything is possible basically under any circumstances. One thing that I've noticed that did gain people political consciousness was when I organized alongside coworkers, and people do become interested because people start thinking of themselves as workers. That's a big hurdle that a lot of people can't cross.
Union density in the US is like 11% right now.
Yeah, and 90% of our unions are fucking pig unions. I mean, like, I don't mean that like the sense like, oh, cop unions, like that's such a goofy argument.
This is a different
thing.
Like
unions that like are reactionary unions that support the regime. That's just the fact of it. I don't think that they should be replaced by no union, but like they're not revolutionary. They're not like left wing. It's just, I think a lot of people think of like unions as this like automatically left wing thing. It's just not the case.
In many cases, the members went for Bernie, and then the administration went for Biden or Elizabeth Warren or so-and-so.
Yeah, they're political organs, right? And so like, obviously, like they are products of this capitalist system, and they very much resemble that. The fact of the matter is though, like people talk about like, oh, we need a revolution, we need a revolution, we need a revolution. I don't disagree, but most workers in America don't even have trade union consciousness, let alone revolutionary consciousness. They're not thinking of themselves as workers, let alone like workers as a class or any of these things. And I think that there's like a lot of like people try to run from that fact as fast as possible and be like, figure out which point, like, oh, this is why there isn't a revolution, this is why there isn't a revolution, this is why there isn't a revolution. And they get away from the fact that revolutionary communism, at least, not necessarily other kinds of revolutionary theory, it requires the proletariat being organized as a class and an alliance of other related classes. Everything else is kind of secondary. Like that's the most important thing. And that's also the toughest nut to crack.
Class has come back in American society, right? So I'm 37. Most of my life I've been living, at the end of history, Francis Fukuyama's end of history. During the Cold War, the fascism is permanently discredited in the 1930s. USSR falls. 1989, it's going to be liberal democracy. This is the end of history, final form of human government. And class just receded as a way of understanding the world. That we didn't have big meta-narratives like bourgeoisie versus proletariat or whatever. But now we're kind of in this period, you were talking about liberal democracy before. It kind of seems like liberal democracy is breaking down, like very visibly. The democratic side of it is almost non-existent, and the liberal side of it is extremely exploitative. The markets are very unstable, the institutions are crumbling. And so the promises of liberal democracy to hold society together, as that wanes, people are then entertaining narratives that were previously unpopular. One of the ways of construing the story, the story of history, how you got to where you are, is class struggle, which is, again, I think, becoming more and more popular. As people are experiencing worse and worse conditions, they're realizing that they're immiserated in their workplace. Like, well, maybe I would actually stand to benefit if I organize with my coworkers.
I think one thing that I have to stress is like, there is no revolutionary theory and there's no revolutionary party and there's going to be no revolution unless those things happen, right? There is class consciousness. That doesn't necessarily change anything, right? Like in and of itself, individual class consciousness that people gain and recognize themselves as workers. There has to be some degree of organization and organs where they can express that consciousness, right?
A party.
A party. A party or something. I mean, yes, a party. I think I'm not interested in any of those like variations of the party form. I think they're fucking bullshit. And if they win, let me know, but they haven't. I think that's really the thing. And like people try to get around this in any kind of way. But like the reality is like there has to be an organized party for any sort of like class consciousness. I mean, there aren't even really organized trade unions that allow the expression of class consciousness as such. Like, I mean, in small ways, yes, but like not acting solely in the interests of the working class.
If there's a young person out there, let's say they're 15 or 16, and they've been bouncing around the political compass for the last few years, and they were in America First person, then they were a NASBOL, now they're an anarcho-collectivist, and then there's some type of, I don't know, esoteric monarchist bullshit. What would you say to that person having lived your beliefs in the real world, having organized in your workplace? You got into politics through like the real world, they got into it through the internet, but we all have to grow up at some point.
Yeah, that's
politics
the real world
happens
now.
to us.
Yeah.
Right? What advice would you give to that person?
I mean, I generally, well, actually that's not true. I dispense advice all the time. I think in general, if people really want to make politics an important part of their lives, and if they want to devote themselves to a cause in a real way where you can be of use to the world and to humanity, try to make sure your own house is in order internally in some way. Because I like you mentioned earlier, I do think that like a lot of the more negative tendencies of people who are into politics end up being just expressions of helplessness and of angst.
Yeah.
You know, we can't eliminate those things from our lives. Nobody can. Least of all, generally, like working people. That's generally they have the hardest time eliminating those things. I would caution people, or I would suggest that people not view it like how I can use politics to like whatever, like help my social life or like gain a friend group, but like how you can actually be of use to humanity and to the world and be of service to other people. That to me is like the only time that I've ever really felt like I was truly living what I believed in any kind of way, was when I was being of service and just as like a worker among workers, among other people. That's, I think, the main thing to realize. I mean, I understand it's probably somewhat hypocritical coming from me because I'm a sort of well-known left-wing personality. But the fact of the matter is like, there's much more utility and use and frankly, if we're getting the anarchist way of thinking, spiritual fulfillment, doing the very basic like slog work of like, go organize your workplace, go like actually like interact with people in the real world. Don't be fucking weird. And don't press your beliefs on other people, because at the end of the day, like, you are fringe. The things that you believe in, a lot of people do not believe in them, and they don't believe in them because of whatever propaganda, whatever. That doesn't matter. They don't believe in them.
Right.
And the way that you do get people on your side is that like you show them that like the things that you believe in are actually like the things that make the most sense. And like if you want to convince them of that, you have to make sense to yourself and like as a member of society. So like, like don't be the fucking like freak in the corner at work on your fucking phone, like fucking Discord chat or whatever. I don't know what these people do, but I think like experience, it breeds a certain maturity and like a certain like, assuredness that you'll feel and that other people will notice that like working people are attracted to. I think there's a lot of fetishization of weakness on the left. And of being like a kind of rebel and I'm a fucking, like punk kind of shit. And that's the world I came from. But like, that is actually like, that is not what you want to do as a political person. You actually want to be a member of society.
You don't want your organization or your political party to be weak.
No.
You want power.
You want to be strong. You want to take actually ultimate power and change the world in an irreversible way.
Right.
And these people do not, like, you have to act like that and you have to think like that. And as part of that, it's like, you have to actually become a member of society. Never like, you can't think of people like, fuck these normies or whatever. Like you can never, ever think like that. Like actually we love normal people.
Yeah. Most people who work, fuck those guys.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and just, it's not a subculture. Like this is, these political, well, some of these are subcultures, but like socialist politics have transformed the world over the years. Millions and millions and millions of people have believed in them, have fought for them, have died for them. And I think that people do a disservice by pretending it's just like, it's like being like straight edge or being whatever. It's a club to be weird in. And not saying that you can't be like a weird person. You probably are if you're into politics to some extent. I'm not saying that I'm the most normal guy in the world.
Amber has a great phrase where she says, beware of people who come to the movement without friends.
Yes.
That they're coming for a social group.
Yeah.
And, you know, admittedly, for any organization, there's going to be get-togethers, there's going to be happy hours or drinks and times to socialize and whatever. But a lot of people just come to it for that.
Yeah.
They don't come to it for the stuff. They don't come to it for the organization or the struggle.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because that's like a musical subculture, right? And I think of people who, they're members of organizations, but then they also have friends who have like totally different lives and maybe don't share their political beliefs. And I've been an artist, right, my whole adult life. I've had this kind of creative peer group where I'm into this other stuff. I have a cultural identity. I don't need a cultural identity from politics.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna be able to go to the dentist unless I get some fucking redistribution and some policies.
Yeah.
You know, I need the stuff from politics. My cultural identity is over here. I like certain films. I like going to art stuff. You know, I make things that hang on walls and galleries.
Yeah.
That doesn't give me a doctor's appointment. It doesn't give me anything else that I need. It doesn't build roads and bridges and create jobs and reshore industry and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I need politics for that.
Yeah, I think that like it's important to not just come from a place of like complete resentment and hatred, but from a place of genuinely like, I love humanity. You know, I love progress. I love to make. I want to make the world a beautiful place to live in. And I think that like the way that society is structured, what you're saying right then, like about people coming to, or what Amber said about people coming to politics with no friends. I agree with that, but I also like the way that society is structured is a lot of people don't have friends. They might have had friends like 30 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's up to people to like actually, you know, try to be there for other people and try to make other people and yourself into like a human being that can like withstand the weird social pressures and like psychic assaults that we're constantly under in our society and emerge as like a bastion of like humanity and normalcy that is also disciplined and organized enough to destroy the United States government.
Brace, thank you so much. Your work is just such an inspiration. I have such admiration for your ability to tell stories.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on
Thanks for
today.
having me.